Hi, everyone, and welcome to another live event. We have lots of exciting things to talk about today. So my name is Sarah. For those of you that don't know me, I've been a nurse for about 16 years. I've worked in all different types of nursing, and I am the co-founder and CEO of the RN Resume. And I have a really exciting guest today. We're going to be talking about breaking down barriers and how she went from bedside to boardroom and everything in between. So my guest today is Pritma Dhillon-Chattha, and I'll let her quickly introduce herself.
Hello, hi everyone. Thanks for joining me, and thank you, Sarah, for having me. I am a registered nurse as well, and I've been nursing since 2003. I started my nursing career when I was just 19 years old, and before that, I was actually a CNA since I was 16. So I'm excited to be here today. I've had a long and windy path as a nurse, working in different settings that were at the time very unique and interesting, where people constantly were asking me, are you still a nurse? So I'm happy to share a little bit about my story today.
Yeah, and for anyone that's watching live, feel free to type questions or comments in the chat. We'll get to them as we go along. So if you have any questions at all, or you want us to go back to anything, we can definitely do that. And I think, Pritma, you've had such an interesting career, and you've done a lot of things before people knew that you could do them. Like, I know you mentioned working from home since 2014. So you're really ahead of your time. And I think you've really been pushing the boundaries of nursing ever since really you became a nurse. And I know that you've done lots of really neat things. I know that at some point you even worked for an airline, and you founded or you co-founded a healthcare startup during COVID, which is really neat. Can you tell the audience some of the different roles you've had throughout your career?
Yeah, for sure. So I started off at the bedside in med-surg, renal transplant. I did a bit of travel nursing, and I enjoyed my time at the bedside. I love being a bedside nurse. When I moved to Canada, I'm a dual citizen. I used to live in the US. I was actually born in Canada, but moved there in the 90s and did my schooling there. But I moved to Calgary in 2006 when I married my husband. And when I came to Calgary, everything just felt a little antiquated at the bedside. I was used to having an EMR. I was used to a different way of hospitals running, and I kind of felt like I went back in time when I started in the Canadian healthcare system in the hospital setting. And so I started looking outside the hospital at the time in 2006. And those were the days of newspaper advertisements. I was looking through the classifieds for my next gig, and I ended up finding a posting with the Calgary Board of Education as an occupational health advisor. I had no idea what that was. I had no certification or training, but I took to the internet, taught myself, applied, and I ended up getting the job. And so that's been a common thread in my journey as a nurse. Is I've always sought out the opportunities. I've turned every kind of stone, and I've always been very, very curious. And I've self-trained myself in many different areas of nursing. So I worked as an occ health nurse for a long period of time for the Calgary Board of Education, and then for WestJet Airlines. I was the first nurse that they had hired, and eventually built out that program into a more robust team, the health, safety, and wellness team. And when I left that organization in 2014, it was a team of over 16 people, I believe. And then went back to the health system because I kind of hit the ceiling in occupational health, and wanted more leadership opportunities. And that's where I fell into health informatics. And so I worked as a change management lead on a variety of tech projects. And then eventually I became the Provincial Director of Electronic Quality and Safety. So looking at electronic health records and how their user interface and their design impact the health and safety of our patients by way of ensuring their design is safe so that nurses like us are using it and selecting the right medications, for example, from a drop-down list, and not selecting the wrong medication, or prescribers aren't prescribing the wrong drug. So there's a lot that goes into the design of the interface that ensures that we don't execute errors in the care of our patients. So I did that for a while, and that's where I really honed kind of my digital health skills. And with digital health, of course, it's such an interesting field. It's such a vast field where I've had the privilege of supporting many different specialties in healthcare across the lifespan with tech. So that's kind of my expertise now. And that's what led me to launch Lavender in 2020 with my co-founder. It's an online psychiatry and therapy office based in the United States. She's a psychiatric nurse practitioner, my co-founder, Bridget, who's amazing. She's based in New York, which is why we launched there. And now we're serving 5 different markets in the United States and continue to expand. So I'm kind of the tech and the operations side of the house, and she's the clinical side of the house. So that's my journey in a nutshell.
Wow, I think you covered a lot of ground in just a few minutes. And I guess, one of the things that people struggle with, especially nurses, is they feel that if they leave the bedside, they're not really a real nurse. And you might hear this a lot. Or when you first tell someone that you're a nurse and then you explain what you do, I know that I get a lot of confused looks, and you might as well. How do you kind of reconcile that idea of what people think a nurse is versus what you do? Because obviously you're still using your skills daily that you learned in nursing school.
Yeah, great question. I think I got a lot of that earlier. I think times have changed, and they're starting to change, or they've continued to change, where consumers in the world sees nurses outside of the traditional bedside roles now, and they see the value of nurses outside in the community. And so it's starting to shift. But yes, definitely, particularly when I worked at WestJet, everyone's like, so you're a flight attendant now? I don't quite understand. And so it did take a while. And I've actually had many people reporting to me that have had to navigate that same shift in their career. And it took me a long time too, to transition from the bedside into a non-bedside role, particularly outside of the health system too, which makes it even more complicated. And it took some time. I still kept my foot I still kept one foot inside the hospital system. I still stayed casual for a very long time. For example, when I took my occupational health role, thinking I'll just do 1 shift a month, or, I want to keep my bedside skills strong. And so it's definitely a bit of an identity crisis that you have to work your way through, and you have to accept it first and foremost, and be proud of the fact that you're still a nurse, whether you're in the patient room or in the boardroom or out in the community. You're still using everything you learned in nursing school and all of your experience that you've gained in the health system. You're still applying it on a day-to-day basis, and that's adding significant value, maybe not in a one-to-one relationship, but in a one-to-many relationship.
Definitely. I think that this question comes up a lot because in my neck of the woods in Ontario, it's almost time for your annual nursing license renewal. One of the questions is, have you practiced as a nurse in the past year? And people get really hung up on that question because they think that practicing as a nurse means you have to be providing direct patient care. But if you actually look into it, it means, are you changing? Are you affecting the healthcare system? Are you part of making change? Are you using your nursing knowledge, skill, and judgment? And that's something you need to determine as an individual, right? So it's not that because you worked in an airline industry or you worked in a different setting that you are not practicing nursing. So I think that's part of that identity shift that you mentioned, and being able to articulate your value in dinner conversation. Like, I am a nurse and this is what I do. And just because I'm not, hanging IV meds or I'm not giving medication, it doesn't make anything that I do of less value. So part of the other topic of today's conversation is really just talking about breaking down barriers and being someone who has done a lot of non-traditional work. Can you talk about some of the barriers that you've encountered through your career and how you worked through some of them?
I think the biggest barrier that I came up against was the world not recognizing my value as a nurse. And going back in the day when I first started exploring opportunities outside of the hospital. And what I mean by that is, I knew my value, I knew my worth, I knew how I could apply my nursing knowledge to designing workflows or to project management or, various other aspects of my career. But the world didn't really understand. I think it took the world to understand to really change the narrative and allow nurses to be in all of these other roles and positions. And once that kind of shift happened, and I feel like it's happened in the last 6 years or so, that the world really understands our value. And that's kind of evidenced by the Future of Nursing report that the Academy of Medicine put out as well, right? Where they're actually saying, calling nurses to action, saying, we need you in the community, ensuring that there's health equity. And the world really feels that nurses are the conduit through which we're going to achieve health equity within the communities, not necessarily in the health system. So that lens has changed. And before that change, I always had to prove myself. And so it always took, multiple applications, multiple conversations, educating people around the role of nurses in the community. And that was my biggest barrier. And it continues to be a barrier for sure, but it's definitely lessened. I think people do have a better understanding of our roles now.
Definitely. And part of what I read about you is that you launched Lavender in 45 days in 2020. So that must have been a crazy time. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey? I'm sure there was a lot more than you can describe today, but just how did this idea even come about? Like, how did you decide you wanted to do this, and what were the steps that you had to take initially just to get this off the ground?
Yeah, well, luckily I wasn't a first-time founder at the time, so which is why there was that accelerated timeline. Both my co-founder and I, neither of us were first-time founders. We each had businesses. I actually had a cosmetic injectable practice. That's another thing I did. I was injecting in 2020 before anyone else was injecting, and it was taboo. But yeah, I had that long-standing practice for 10 years at the time, and I was actually standing in the practice. It was the day that all the businesses were shut down. My husband's a dentist, his clinics were shut down, my clinic was shut down, and I was standing there looking around thinking, crap. We have no income coming in. I was 3 months postpartum.
Wow.
0 income coming in. I was actually on maternity leave from Alberta Health Services because I never actually became a full-time entrepreneur until 2021. It took me that long to cut the cord with the health system. So let that sink in. Let that sink in, going back to like that identity crisis. It's not easy to jump 2 feet into the entrepreneurship bucket and say, yes, tomorrow I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off and go be an entrepreneur. It's scary as hell. And you won't be able to do it overnight. It took me 13 years to do it. So it's slow and steady, and sometimes it's fast and quick, but then you have to have a unicorn, right? So anyways, standing in that clinic, I called Bridget. We were kind of already talking about what's our next step? What are we going to do next? Because we're serial entrepreneurs, and we were already talking about opening up psychiatry clinics, but brick and mortar. And I called her. I said, we're shut down. We have nothing going on. And her business was shut down too. She was providing psychiatric consultations in nursing homes in the greater New York area. Of course, that's where the biggest issues were within nursing homes in New York. And so we said, let's launch an online psychiatry office. And that was basically the moment that we decided we had nothing to lose. We each invested $6,500, and we created a project plan and just did it. So it took a lot of steps. Obviously, you have to register your PC, you have to figure out what EMR you want to use, set that up, develop all your policies, procedures, your forms, get your malpractice, get your nurse practitioners. We were lucky where we just shifted Bridget's nurse practitioners that otherwise weren't able to work onto Lavender. And we said, we're going to do kind of an Uber style. You put in the calendar whenever you're available. And if we get a client, great. If we don't, we'll pay you only for the appointments that you complete. And so, yeah, we were able to launch in 45 days. And now, we're 3.5 years, and we just hit 100 people.
Wow.
So we're announcing that today at our holiday party, actually. And yeah, we're all of a sudden a big business. I still have to pinch myself, but it didn't happen overnight. In fact, the first month we had 1 client. And it was crickets. I remember even hitting publish on the EMR and setting everything up. I'm like, are we good? Should we launch? Yeah, we launched. And it was crickets. It was like nothing.
Yeah.
So lots of fun times and lots of great lessons learned. But I think the big lesson that I want to share with folks out there is that nothing happens overnight and nothing happens without adversity. It's easy for people to think that, oh, look at Pritma and she's got this. And, she makes it look so easy, but it was hard. It was hard as hell. And it was a lot of work, and it took years to build.
Yeah, I'm glad that I hear your story because it resonates a lot with me as well. The part that you mentioned about how long it took you to cut the cord, because I actually had a business I tried to launch over 10 years ago. And I say try because I didn't really launch it. I was too scared to tell anybody I had this business. And so it never really took off. And so it took me a long time before I got over that fear of trying to start another business, right? So I think people hear and they see the successes, but they don't see all the work that goes behind it. Like the tip of the iceberg is what you see, but you don't see everything that happened before, everything that's supporting what we're doing right now. And for me, I took that leap at the end of 2021, and it was the scariest thing I'd ever done. Like, I actually had to convince my husband that we should do this. And I had spoken to another entrepreneur friend, and he said, why didn't you tell him you're going to time box it? You're going to give it 12 months and, reassess at the time. If it's really not where you think it's going to be, you can always go back to what you were doing before. So that was how I sold him on this is what we should do now. But I think there's so much to be said about just when I talk to nurses that have started businesses, there's so much that came out of the pandemic. So I think there's a lot of loss of obviously that came out of the pandemic, but there's a lot of innovation that came and just pivoting because we had to and learning to adapt because that's the situation that we were in.
Yeah. And, you make a good point where the first business you launched, you didn't tell anyone. And that's one of the key things I tell nurses. I mentor a lot of nurses, and they are embarrassed. They're shy about their idea. And I tell them the first thing you need to do is tell the world, and start before you're ready. So you're not ready now. Guess what? You're never going to be ready. Just start incrementally. Set up that corporation. Even if it doesn't go like what it's $100 you lost, not a big deal, right? Start doing that. Start talking to people. Talk to your startup community. And as you do that, it actually validates your idea, if it is a good idea. And it also opens up your network because you never know who you're going to bump into that can take it to the next level. And it also provides you momentum and makes you feel like it's something real that you should be continuing with. Otherwise, it's just in your head. You're going to put it off. It's never going to be shared with the world. And your ideas are worth sharing, right? And I think a lot of people feel that someone's going to steal their idea, but nobody is going to steal your idea. An idea in and of itself is not successful without the passion behind it. And it's very unlikely you're going to meet someone equally as passionate about your idea. And instead, you're actually going to meet people that can support you, that have complementary services or skills that can help you bring this idea to market.
Absolutely. And I think that there's a big ocean out there. So just because someone's doing similar to something I'm doing or something that you're doing, it doesn't mean there isn't enough room for all of us. I also think that one of the reasons my business didn't succeed the first time around is social media was not really a big thing. It definitely wasn't a thing for businesses. I can say with confidence that with my current business and my podcast, I wouldn't be where I am without social media. Like, I think that it just makes it so much easier to scale and sort of get the word out there about what you do.
100%. And it's great for testing as well and networking, right? Lots of people, how many people have I met on LinkedIn? And I feel like I have a genuine face-to-face relationship with them, but I've never actually met them. But they've benefited my business, my career. So that's the other thing is nurses need to really get out there and network a lot more.
Definitely. So we have a couple comments here in the chat. Someone says such great points. Tara says, yes, 100% to being room for all of us. Tara is actually someone who's been a longtime supporter of me. She is a nurse psychotherapist. So I just wanted to put it out there. She's done some amazing work. She's got a full roster of virtual and in-person clients. So thank you, Tara, for joining. If anyone listening has any questions about anything at all, feel free to type it in the chat. Otherwise, Pritma and I will just keep going. And talk about the things that really kind of drive us and things that, inspire us to do what we do. So I think for myself, I was always talking myself out of doing things before I even started. Like, oh, I don't know if I should start a business. I don't know if I know what I'm doing. I don't know if I have any money to invest. Like, I failed before. Should I do it? And I think for me, the pandemic just just revealed a lot of things to me. So my job at the time was in person, but we worked from home 1 day a week. And then when the pandemic hit, we were just all virtual 100% of the time. So that gave me back 2 hours a day easily to do something else. And I think for people that think they don't have time to build a business, I tell them, I didn't watch Netflix for 2 years because all my mornings and all my evenings were spent building a business. And if you go to your phone, I know my phone has a weekly report of how much time I spend on it. If you think about how much time you spend scrolling, that there is your time that you could be just slowly building towards something else. So, and I'm saying this because I've got 2 kids. I was trying to start 2 businesses. I was working full time. So it is possible. And I do recognize that I was in a position of privilege. But I do think that sometimes when we make excuses, it's because we're scared and they're not real excuses.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. And definitely, I acknowledge that too. I was in a position of privilege where I could afford to jump in. But even when you're not, like I know my business partner, when she launched her first business, she got herself in $60,000 of credit card debt in order to do so, but she believed in her vision and she validated her product. So I'm not saying go spend $60,000 on your credit card right out the gate, but validate that your idea is a good one and it's solving a problem and a need for the consumer, not a hypothesis of what you think the consumer wants. Once it's validated and you have good product market fit and you really believe in yourself, go at it, right? It's, there's some debt that's good debt. And if the idea is as great as your clients say it is, it's gonna pay off. And even if it doesn't, we all fail sometimes too. My first injectable practice failed. And then I had to regroup and move it to a new location because I realized location really matters. And as well as demographic, right? I had the wrong location, the wrong demographic, but I pivoted and I moved it. It cost me a fortune, but then it paid off.
Absolutely. And I think that in this world of entrepreneurship and especially nurse entrepreneurship, there are not a lot of role models, at least that I know of, doing what it is that nurses do. So do you have any role models, or how did you kind of figure your way out in this business world?
My role models in the business world are outside of nursing. I have many. Manjeet Minhas is a good friend of mine, and I always pick her brain, so I'm lucky to have her as a mentor. And then nurses, one of my mentors and my role models is Shauna Butler. She is absolutely amazing. She's a nurse economist. She has done so much. She's the host of the See You Now podcast, and she is just a bridge builder. She is a connector of nurses. She knows so many nurses doing such inspiring and different things. And then that's how I've been connected to other nurses doing incredible things. Tofiki is another amazing man who is a nurse, and they launched Safe Seizure. And so we've been in connection with them for quite some time because they have a similar story to us. And it's just inspiring to see other nurses in that space, because it's a lonely space, and we want to build community and we want to build support for those that want to join. And there's plenty of space, going back to the space comment. There's plenty of space in the market, and there's plenty of space among nurses to be doing, going into the entrepreneurship realm, if that's what you want to do.
Mm-hmm, yeah. It's funny that you mentioned Manjeet's name because I'm a longtime fan of Dragon's Den. So actually, during those early days when I was trying to launch my first business, I watched it religiously. I watched it weekly. And I thought, there are so many good and bad things that people do. And I tried to pick up on what the good things were and the not so good things. And I just think there's so much value in going and doing your own thing if that's something you want to do. There's so much support out there. Like you said, you need to look outside nursing, you need to talk to other people, you need to figure out what it is that you can do. And just one other thing I wanted to touch upon is sometimes people get confused about what it is to have a business. So just because you're incorporated or you have an LLC or you have a website set up, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a business. Like you said, Pritma, you have to have an idea that people are actually interested in, and then you have to have clients and you have to have income. Like, that's the business. The other stuff is just administrative.
Yeah. I know a lot of people trying a lot of side hustles, and I think definitely starting off the side of your desk is important, because nobody has the luxury to just quit their day job. But you need to time box it, just like you said. You need to time box it and say, I'm going to give this a try for 3 months or 6 months. And if it fails, then you need to, wave the white flag and say, this failed. I need to move on to my next idea. I find too often people stick to their ideas too long, and they're too close to them. They're married to them. And they're not achieving product market fit. They're draining their resources, their time. They're taking time away from their family. So to be a good entrepreneur is to have good intuition when something will be successful or not, and also to be able to take the risk, to leap, but also to take the risk to rebound and say, actually, that wasn't a good idea, and I need to step back and I need to withdraw from it and move on to the next thing. So there's a lot of character traits when it comes to being an entrepreneur, and I feel like that's not talked about enough. It's not something that everyone has. And I think all too often we say anyone can be an entrepreneur, and I kind of disagree with that. I think you do have to have specific character traits. You have to have risk-taking behavior. You have to have good analysis behavior. You have to have a good understanding of the market too. So if you are an entrepreneur, you should go into something that you're an expert at, or quite a bit about, especially if you're a first-time entrepreneur, because otherwise it's just conjecture and hypothesis, and you're not actually the real user or the real client. So, I know a lot of nurses are drawn to entrepreneurship, and there's a lot of these gurus online saying, and coaches saying, we can get you a business stood up in 45 days and you can be successful and have a 6-figure income. I would be wary of those because nothing happens that quickly. And you have to really evaluate yourself and be very self-aware as to, is this something that I can tolerate? Am I an entrepreneur, or do I need to bring in a business partner who has that operational hat or that entrepreneurial mindset that maybe I don't? Maybe I'm the clinical expert, and that's invaluable. That's invaluable. Don't for 1 minute devalue yourself for just being the clinical expert. That is absolutely necessary. But you also need to be able to identify that I don't have potentially what it takes to figure out, how do I bring this to market, and what are all of the economic things that I need to consider.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of these traits you mentioned are not set in stone. So they are traits that you can develop over time, right?
Yeah.
So just because you weren't a risk taker in the past doesn't mean you can't take small calculated risks in a business. Just because you're someone that likes to do things a certain way doesn't mean you can't pivot when you see the need. And I also want to bring about the point that it's important to focus on growth and potential, right? So my very first year in business, which was 2019, I started halfway through the year, I made under $1,000. And I only feel comfortable saying this now because I was able to, 5x, 10x that income over a long period of time. But just focus on the potential and not, what did I make, or I only made this much in this amount of time. Like you said, you started Join Lavender with one client, but you're up to so many more now. So it's really just about like, how can you grow it, and how can you pivot, and how can you learn from the mistakes that you've made? Because I actually just sat down and I made a list of all my successes and failures over 2023. And I don't share the failures, but the list of failures is almost as long as the list of successes. But I only obviously share the successes because that's social media. But maybe one day I'll share some of my epic failures. Like they're just, just like, for example, I have been trying to launch this online resume course for like 2 years now. No one's biting because I think that what nurses want is actually something else. But I wouldn't know that if I didn't try it, right? So I'm happy to share this publicly. Like that was one of my failures, but I'm learning from it, and I think I'm either going to cut the cord or I'm going to pivot for next year.
Also, I mean, whenever you fail, take some time to reflect on that and think about, what was the lesson learned? How could I have done it differently? Because just because it failed doesn't mean that it's not a viable solution. Like your course, for example, could you have done a poll? Could you have done could you have surveyed nurses? Could you have done some listening sessions or something like that before you actually, went through the whole plan? If you executed the plan, there's so many things that you can learn from failures that will serve you as you grow and as you build your path to entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. So we got a couple more comments here. So Kome says, thank you for sharing so candidly about managing challenges that can show up in traditional practice and on the entrepreneurial path. How have you known when to endure and apply grit, or to cut your losses and rest or regroup?
It's hard, especially if it's a first time failure and you're new to it. I guess the most recent thing that comes to mind is we launched in Florida at the beginning of this year, and that market we have just not been able to figure out. So we're currently in New York, Jersey, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Washington State, and Florida. And we're finally now having conversations in our biweekly Florida meeting about when do we call it? When do we call this code? um, and it took us a year because we have pride and we have ego. But there's so many things that we learned in the Florida market that it's not goodbye forever. It's maybe pause, like maybe what we'll do is pause and maintain our clients that we currently have or something, and then come back to it when we're ready, because there's certain things that we weren't aware of, like BCBS, that panel was closed to providers. So we haven't been able to get onto that panel, and it's the biggest insurer in Florida. Well, we didn't know to look into that before we launched in Florida at the beginning of the year. Now we do. So now when we launch into California and all these other places where we have a checklist, we built that, all those checks and balances into it anytime we launch into a new region. So in this case, it took us 12 months. But I think when you're trying and your trying is too hard and you constantly are going up against resistance over an extended period of time, is when you should really start looking internally. And I use that not just in my professional career, but in my personal career as well. I always use that analogy for relationships. Like if it's so hard to maintain your relationship, maybe you're not in the right relationship. How long are you going to sustain that? And in business, you're kind of in a relationship. You know, that was our relationship with Florida. And how long are we going to, you know, keep trying? And resisting. And so for that, like a year was good, but and it's hard because at the same time I want to say keep trying, right? But there has to be a time limit on it. And I think definitely 6 to 12 months is a good time limit to know that you haven't, especially when you're launching a new product market fit should come pretty easily. And quickly. It should come within the first 3 to 6 months. And it doesn't need to be massive fit. It just needs to be some conversions. And with those conversions, you iterate your product to really cater to those first few sales and see how that sold and then continue on.
Amazing. Thank you for that feedback. So we have another question from Melissa. What about going the boardroom route? More interested at having a seat at the table. Is an MN or MBA needed?
Don't get me on MN versus MBA. Great.
So for full disclosure, I have an MN and you have an MBA, correct?
Yeah, I have an MBA. I have a master's in health administration, and every nurse I mentor, I tell them to get an MHA or an MPH or not any other master's, but a different master's than a master's in nursing. However, masters in nursing have come a long way. There's now more masters in nursing with a focus in leadership and other more practical things that you need as a leader. But otherwise, the MN never prepared anyone for being a leader. And it was the biggest misnomer. I feel like so many nurses went in to get their MN, and really all of the manager job descriptions in any health system you look at will ask for an MHA. They won't ask for a master's in nursing, unless maybe floor manager, like a unit manager might. But otherwise, it's always an MHA or an MPH. And so I definitely have a bias towards that. I did my MHA, and it opened up so many doors for me. It was one of the best decisions in my life. It opened up doors within the health system, but also outside the health system, because anywhere outside the health system, the oil and gas companies I worked for, WestJet, the Calgary Board of Education, they all recognize health administration or business administration. So it really depends on where you want to lean, in the health system or outside. I can't talk enough about the MHA, but I'll pass it over to you, Sarah, about the MN. I apologize.
No. I went straight from my undergrad to doing my master's. So I think that I just wanted to have a graduate degree. That was the main thing. And I managed to get into leadership within the hospital system. And at the time, I'm not sure about now, but at the time they wanted you to have a master's in anything basically. So it could have been nursing, it could have been education, could have been health administration, could have been an MBA. They just wanted you to be master's prepared. So it wasn't very specific to anything, right? But I did promise one of my group members that I would ask you this, and maybe you have the answer, maybe you don't. But what sorts of career options are available to a nurse who also has an MBA? Do you think that's necessary to have, or is it more about the experience that you build?
I think an MBA is an amazing qualification. It's going to open up a lot of doors. So an MBA is equally as great as an MHA. And I don't think either is better than the other. So if you're thinking about doing an MBA, I think definitely go for it. The lived experience that you get, and you learn more from not just the curriculum, but the people in the room with you, the case studies that you go through, because in an MBA cohort or an MHA cohort, you're going to see and meet so many people in various different positions, and you're going to learn from them as they ask questions, answer questions within the classroom settings, and as you have group projects together. So you learn a lot, and that's my biggest bias is with the MN, is that it doesn't actually teach you many leadership skills that you need as a manager or a leader. It doesn't give you the finance pieces. It doesn't give you project management. It doesn't give you organizational behavior. All of those are included in an MHA or an MBA. So I definitely am a strong advocate of either of those programs, and I think they will set you apart when applying to leadership positions.
Amazing.
For those also that like can't afford an MBA or aren't ready, their family situation doesn't allow it. Other things that I would consider are like your change management, ProSci change management certification, your project management certification. Those are really important. Also doing situational leadership certification and training is really important if you're on the path to leadership and you're trying to beef up kind of your resume and your skill set. Those are things that managers and leaders would be looking for.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because a lot of times nurses come to me and say, I'm looking for the next step in my career. I'm thinking about going back to school. I want to get another degree. And I always say, hang on, before you do that, let's talk about the skills you already have. Like, is this something you're really committed to? Or can you achieve the same with taking a course, like you said, or a certification? I think these are questions that they're good to think about, because rather than spending tens of thousands of dollars and years getting a degree that may not be totally relevant, you might want to just start with some courses and see, is this something I even want to do?
Yeah, start with courses and start with shadowing people in the system. Ask, people are very generous, particularly leaders I find nowadays, and nurse leaders. It's no longer the day of nurses eat their young. Like, I find that there's been this movement in nursing where we are supporting one another and we really want to uplift one another. And so talk to another nurse in a leadership position in your organization and ask if you could shadow them on your own time, not paid by the organization. Invest in yourself in learning about the different roles. And even when you say you want to be in leadership, what does that mean to you? Because you could be leading people or you could be leading programs. Do you want to be a people leader, which I don't love, or do you want to be a program leader, right? Like I was the director of electronic quality and safety. That was a program. I had a very small team of like 3 people. That was totally manageable, but I was developing programs and tools for the organization, So you could be leading policy design and policy frameworks, but not necessarily have a roster of people that report up to you. So there's a lot of different ways that leadership shows up in health systems.
Right. Or you could be leading a project. So if you have your project management, that's what you could be doing as well. Yeah. Valerie says, love the idea of reflecting deeply on failures as lessons learned. Absolutely agree. This next question I'm going to throw to you, Pritma. Would you advise seeking a technical lead early? I'm not quite sure what this question means. Maybe you do.
I'm not sure either. Would you advise seeking a technical lead early? Maybe it's someone launching a startup that wants
maybe
more technical person. I'm not sure if they can share some more context.
Yeah, if you, whoever wrote this, if you could give a bit more context, we'll come back to you if we have a minute. Sarah says, great information. Yes, this recording will be available. So anybody that's watching live, it is being recorded. If you go back to the LinkedIn event page, it'll be there forever. It'll also be posted to my YouTube channel, so you can send me a message and I will give you the link. So yes, definitely will be available to you. Any other questions from anyone? Sorry, I interrupted your train of thought. You were talking about something and I thought, well, we better go back to that. Yes. So, I mean, we've talked about a lot of different things. I think we mainly talked about, getting into business and breaking down barriers. Is there anything else that you want to share about your journey, or like questions that you get a lot that you want to let people know about today?
That's a very broad question.
Maybe you can share what you're going to be planning for 2024. Are there any big things coming up for Lavender or anything going on?
Yeah, I mean, we have our leadership on-site coming up in January, and we've been talking a lot about what 2024 will look like for us. We'll be expanding into 10 additional states in 2024. This year was a housekeeping year, and one where we didn't expand into any additional states, but we had to level up a lot of our systems and processes and do a lot of hires so that we can scale next year. So it's going to be a big growth year for Lavender. We're going to grow into 10 additional states. We're moving onto a more robust EMR platform, I hope. We've been exploring that for a while now, so I hope that we can bring it to fruition in 2024. But yeah, that's what we're doing in 2024. And then I'm doing more on a personal front. I'm just doing more mentorship and support of nurses. I really love giving back. I know I used to do a lot of one-on-one support with nurses, but my time can't sustain that as much as I would love to. So I launched a weekly newsletter, actually. So if folks want to sign up for that on Pritma.com, I drop a Saturday morning, very quick read, like 2-minute read newsletter that's very practical. Some of the tips that I shared today in terms of, ways that you can level up if you want to become a manager or a leader in your organization, as well as advice around schooling, as well as entrepreneurship advice. And sometimes, I rant about being a mom. So that's definitely a place where you can get some more practical tips if that's of interest.
Awesome. So any of the links that we share, we'll post them in the chat afterwards so people can get them. And it looks like this person rephrased their question about the technical lead. So thoughts of having a technical lead in context of creating a more tech-based startup. Is this something you felt like you needed to do? Many incubators I'm looking at seek having a tech lead. So wondering if you had to deal with that at all.
Yes. I would agree with the incubator. So my prior startup that got acquired was called HealthGig, and it was a online credentialing platform, again, focused on the US market because credentialing is a big pain point. So when I had the idea for that, I'm not a developer. I have health informatics experience and I know the lingo and can definitely manage tech projects, but I can't do the actual technical pieces of work. And so I scouted a co-founder, a CTO, when I was launching that. And it was one of the best decisions I made. I was very thorough about who I selected. So just that would be my only word of caution, is just make sure that you're picking the right person because you're kind of going into a marriage with them. So make sure you have all of the important conversations up front in terms of, what the split is going to, what the equity split is going to be, what the time commitment is going to be. Think about, try to imagine 5 years from now, this is really successful. We're making $10 million. What does that look like? What do our roles look like? And make sure you have the paperwork in order in terms of your founder's agreement. But it is a very important decision, not one to be rushed through or taken lightly, especially if it's your baby. But I definitely agree, because that technical expertise is invaluable if you're starting a software product, a SaaS product. And if you were to outsource that, it's very, very costly. So it will help circumvent some of those startup costs for you.
Okay. They said, thanks so much. Okay. Yeah. And I just wanted to share some of the stuff that I'm up to for 2024. So if you guys don't know, I have a book coming out. It's called The Wisdom of Nurses. So that's dropping on April 2nd, 2024. It's up for
Interesting.
free sale. It's up for free sale right now. So I will share the link in the chat. So if you guys are interested, it is being turned into an ebook as well as an audiobook as well. So that's pretty exciting. If anyone listening is interested in non-traditional jobs, I am sending out a free guide on Saturday morning. So I'll also drop the link into how you can sign up for my newsletter, which also comes out on Saturdays. So if you want to sign up for both, then you'll get lots of stuff in your inbox on Saturday morning. It is a list of 70 plus traditional or non-traditional nursing jobs. And because I'm kind of anal, I broke it down into categories and there's definitions too. So you don't want to miss that. It's absolutely free. And I'll put my website in the chat as well. It is thernresume.com if you're interested in learning a bit more about me or if you just want to take the next step in your career. And Pritma, do you want to share how people can find you?
Yeah, they can find me on www.pritma.com. You can contact me through there as well. That's where I live. Or reach out to me through LinkedIn. Send me a DM.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. It looks like there aren't any other questions. So hope you enjoyed this. If you have any other suggestions for topics for other LinkedIn Lives, let me know. Bye, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks for tuning in.